So as a D-Mini player, when you're on the course, you need to look at trouble a little bit different than the typical player. Um, Typical player, sees things, I don't understand. It's been so long since I thought this way, but they might say something like, yeah, that hole's wide open. And you look at it and you don't see that. You see trouble left and trouble right. You see spots where you could be re-teeing, which is part of your problem. But anyway, you got to realize that not all trouble is the same. For example, a lot of the times hazard is way less of a problem than out of bounds. And when you're out on the courses, you're trying to pick your targets and manage your misses. Really priority one is to try to hit the shot that isn't going to leave you re-teeing. So a lot of times, if you're struggling with it a little bit, you should be picking targets that are like way far away from the OB stakes, for example. So let's say you've got a hole and it's not that demon-y of a hole for you, because maybe it's got OB up the left, and then on the right maybe some fairway bunkers and some trees and maybe another hole, right? So like a normal player might recognize that and maybe favor the right side of the fairway, set up on the left side of the tee, aim down the right side, and play away. So that's kind of what you have to do, except you have to do that on steroids as a D-Mini player. You've got to set up on the left side of the tee and not aim for the fairway, okay? I'm sorry. If you've got the demons, you just don't have that option. You've got to aim almost between the fairways, all right? Aim it way far right and just let it rip. And be okay with hitting it into the trees in between the holes, because at least, you know what? At least you're not re-teeing. You are walking off that tee box and you're playing golf, as opposed to going back to your cart and re-teeing like an idiot, having just hit it left out of bounds when you have another hole in the right. So look for those situations. In addition to that, even if it's like one side is out of bounds and one side is hazard, you gotta almost let it rip towards the hazard, because even if you hit in the hazard, it's not that big a deal compared to some of the issues you're used to. I mean, walking up and taking a drop and hitting it on the green and two putting for bogey is not that big a deal compared to the types of problems that you are used to having, where we're re-teeing multiple times and taking nines. So just realize that regular course strategy doesn't quite fit for you at the moment. Now, hopefully you're going to fix them, you're working on the demons, but while you have them, you have to take course strategy and take a whole different outlook, because your miss pattern is just so much different than a normal player at your ability level. So take that for what it's worth. Don't hit it in the native or out of bounds if there's any kind of open hole on the other side. All right, this totally applies still. One of the big things that helped me out was Decade Golf, if you're familiar with it, Scott Fawcett's program. When I talk about taking the emotion out of targets and club selection, one thing that helped me was to Google map the course out, figure out where the widest findable zones are, and then commit to hitting it to that spot, whatever that yardage was. So if it's widest at 3-wood range, I'm hitting 3-wood, period. At least in the beginning stages, like, you want the widest possible spot. You're not necessarily looking for scoring optimal spots, but you want the widest possible spot off the tee, yardage wise, findable that you can hit, because we're trying to build some confidence too. Like, in Decade, you're looking for a range generally of 65 yards wide to be green light for driver. And I will say, a modification to that, if you're D-Mini, is, let's say it's 65 yards wide at driver from out of bounds to hazard or whatever, but it's 80 yards wide at 3-wood. Eventually you're going to hit driver there every time, but in the short run, I would advise hitting the 3-wood into the, let's say it's 90 yards wide at 3-wood range, or 100 yards wide at hybrid range. One of the things we gotta do for you is we gotta build up your confidence, and in the long run, trust me, you'll be able to stand there at 65 yards and confidently hit driver once you get it figured out. But in the very short term, as you're trying to manage it, remember, we're trying to manage this. lower our anxiety. We're gonna pick the club that goes to the widest possible landing spot that's long enough to reasonably have a chance to hit the green or whatever, make par. And then, you know, using the decade stuff, you're gonna, you know, if you've got a 100-yard wide landing spot and you're hitting, say, a 3-wood to it, if the left side's really bad, you're gonna bias way more to the right. You're not gonna care if you hit it into the trees on the right, as long as it's findable and you can get a swing on it. You're not gonna care about hitting it onto the next hole over, as long as you can hit it again. So totally cool to maybe overdo that part a little bit, at least as you're working through it, until you can start to get some more findable shots, a little more confidence going. But yeah, course strategy stuff that, you know, this was before, I recorded this before I knew much about, you know, decade and course management in those, you know, analytical or analytics type of terms or forms. But it all pretty much aligns with the way I would advise anyway.